The sound of splintering wood exploded through the afternoon air. My hands froze on the garden shears as I turned to witness my handcrafted cedar gate, my pride and joy, collapsing inward with a sickening crunch. Through the cloud of dust stood a white cruiser, its blue lights flashing silently against the broken planks. Sheriff Sheila stepped out, adjusting her mirrored sunglasses, a smirk playing across her face as she surveyed the destruction. "Sheriff's Department, step aside," she announced, her voice colder than January steel. My heart hammered against my ribs. "What suspect? There's nobody here but me." She ignored my question, her boot crushing a fallen fence slat as she strode onto my property, hand resting on her holster. "Official business. That's all you need to know." I reached for my phone, fingers trembling. "I'm recording this. You had no right." "Recording an officer. That could be obstruction," she interrupted, her smile widening. "Careful now." It was in that moment, watching her deliberately kick aside the remnants of my gate, that I realized this was no accident. This was a message, and it would cost her department $200,000 before I was done. That gate was more than a barrier. It was a promise. After 43 years working construction, my hands cracked and calloused from decades of honest labor, I had built that gate myself from reclaimed cedar I had salvaged from an old barn demolition project. Every plank had been sanded by my own hands, every nail driven with precision. It stood 8 feet tall with decorative ironwork that I had commissioned from Walter, the town blacksmith, one of the few craftsmen left in our small community of Millfield. The gate marked the entrance to my sanctuary, 3 acres of land that I had purchased with my retirement savings, a place where I could finally live in peace after a lifetime of building homes for other people. Behind that fence, I had planted a vegetable garden with 7 varieties of heirloom tomatoes. I had built a workshop where I restored antique furniture found at estate sales. I had created a life that was simple, honest, and mine. My 2 German shepherds, Duke and Lady, could run safely within the confines of that fence, chasing squirrels and barking at passing deer. The wooden barrier kept my tools protected from opportunistic thieves who occasionally drifted through our changing town. Most importantly, it kept the world at just enough distance that I could breathe. No neighbors peering over my shoulder, no unsolicited visitors interrupting my day. Just enough separation to feel free. Sheriff Sheila Walters had been elected 3 years prior. Everyone in town knew her, not for her community service or dedication to justice, but for her rigid enforcement of even the most trivial regulations. She had written citations to the Methodist Church for their food drive banner being 2 inches too large. She had impounded Mrs. Patterson's car while the 70-year-old widow was inside the pharmacy picking up her heart medication. Sheila was feared more than respected, a fact she seemed to wear like a badge of honor alongside her polished star. That afternoon in early June, the air was heavy with the scent of approaching rain. I was on my knees near the gate, fixing a loose hinge that had begun to squeak during the spring storms. My toolbox lay open beside me, a cold glass of lemonade sweating on top of my fence post. Duke and Lady were napping under the shade of the old oak tree, their ears occasionally twitching at distant sounds. The road in front of my property remained quiet most days. An occasional truck or local vehicle would pass, drivers often lifting a finger from their steering wheel in the universal rural greeting. I had just tightened the final screw on the hinge when I heard the sound. Tires crunching gravel, an engine revving slightly. Then the horrific crack of wood giving way under force. I turned, screwdriver still clutched in my hand, to witness something I never imagined possible. A white and blue sheriff's department cruiser, lights flashing but siren silent, was pushing through my gate as though it were made of matchsticks instead of solid cedar. The wood splintered outward, Metal hinges tore from their moorings. My dogs leapt to their feet, barking frantically as the vehicle came to a stop halfway inside my property. That was the day peace splintered in Millfield. Not just for me, but for everyone who would soon learn that no one, not even a sheriff, should be above the law. Sheriff Sheila stepped out of her cruiser, adjusting her belt with practiced casualness. Glass and wood fragments crunched beneath her polished boots as she surveyed the damage with what I could only describe as satisfaction glimmering in her eyes. My dogs continued barking from the porch where they had retreated, sensing the sudden tension in the air. "Sheriff," I said, struggling to keep my voice level, "what is the meaning of this? You just destroyed my gate." She removed her sunglasses with deliberate slowness, folding them and hanging them from her shirt pocket. "In pursuit of a suspect," she stated flatly. I looked beyond her cruiser to the empty road. No other vehicles, no running figures, nothing but dust settling on the rural county road. My property sat at the end of a dead-end drive. There was nowhere a suspect could have run except deeper into my land. "What suspect?" I asked, gesturing to the empty landscape around us. "There is nobody here but me and my dogs." Sheila's expression hardened. I had reason to believe a person of interest in an ongoing investigation came this way. Necessary action in the line of duty. "You could have knocked," I said, pointing to the intercom system clearly visible beside the now-destroyed gate. "Or called out. That gate cost me thousands to build, not counting my own labor." "When pursuing a suspect, officers are not required to announce their presence," she replied, her voice taking on the rehearsed quality of someone reciting policy. "Section 12 of the County Code authorizes necessary force to apprehend criminals." I felt my face flush with anger and disbelief. "I would like a report number for this incident. I need it for my insurance." Something changed in her expression then, a flicker of calculation. "There will not be a formal report. This was part of active police work. You cannot just drive through private property and refuse to document it," I insisted, reaching for my phone. "I would like your badge number as well." Sheriff Sheila's hand moved subtly toward her holster, not drawing her weapon, but reminding me of its presence. "I would advise you to mind your property and stay out of police business. Interfering with an investigation could result in obstruction charges." She turned away before I could respond, returning to her vehicle. The cruiser reversed with a spray of gravel, pieces of my gate dragging beneath its undercarriage. Through the window, I saw her smirking as she drove away, leaving me standing amid the wreckage of my sanctuary. I stood there for several long minutes, my hands shaking with a combination of shock and fury. Finally, Duke nudged my palm with his nose, bringing me back to the moment. I surveyed the damage methodically, the way I had assessed construction projects for decades. The gate was destroyed beyond repair. The frame had been twisted from the impact, concrete footings cracked from their moorings. This was not a simple fix. This was complete destruction. That evening, I drove to the sheriff's department and filed a formal complaint, complete with photographs of the damage and a detailed account of the incident. The deputy behind the desk took my paperwork with obvious discomfort, his eyes darting toward Sheriff Sheila's closed office door several times during our interaction. "Someone will be in touch," he mumbled, sliding my complaint into a drawer rather than the filing cabinet behind him. Days passed with no response. I called the department 3 times, each attempt met with vague assurances that my complaint was being processed. No deputy came to assess the damage. No follow-up questions were asked. No report number was provided. Standing in my yard on the 5th day, looking at the jagged opening where my gate once stood, I made a decision. If Sheriff Sheila believed her badge placed her above accountability, I would teach her otherwise. Her silence was not just negligence, it was arrogance. And that arrogance had just crashed into the wrong man's gate. The day after filing my complaint, I walked across the road to speak with my neighbor, Larry Goodwin. Larry had lived in his modest farmhouse for 30 years, his property facing mine across the narrow county road. A retired postal worker with a habit of sitting on his front porch most afternoons, Larry saw everything that happened on our quiet stretch of road. "Been wondering when you would come by," Larry said, gesturing to the rocking chair beside him. A glass of iced tea waited on the small table between us. "Saw what happened with the sheriff. Been bothering me something fierce." I settled into the chair, accepting the offered drink. "I need to know exactly what you saw, Larry. The sheriff is claiming she was in pursuit of a suspect." Larry snorted, a sound of pure disbelief. "There was no chase, Jim, nothing of the sort." He leaned forward, his weathered face serious. "I was right here, same as I am every day. Road was empty for at least 20 minutes before she showed up. She came down slow like she was looking for something. Then she pulled up to your gate and just sat there." "She sat there for how long?" I asked. 3, maybe 4 minutes, Larry replied, certainty in his voice. "Just idling. Then she backed up about 20 feet and I figured she was turning around. Instead, she accelerated straight at your gate, deliberate as can be. There was no suspect, no emergency, no reason for it that I could see." My suspicions hardened into certainty. "Would you be willing to write that down? Sign a statement about what you witnessed?" Larry was already nodding before I finished my question. "Been keeping my own notes since it happened. Sheriff Sheila has been throwing her weight around this town too long. Not right what she did. Not legal either." That afternoon, I left Larry's house with a signed, dated statement describing exactly what he had witnessed. The next morning, I drove to the county administration building and requested access to the public dispatch logs for the day of the incident. As a taxpayer, I had the right to review non-confidential police communications. The clerk seemed nervous about my request but could not legally deny it. She disappeared into a back room and returned 30 minutes later with printed records. I scanned the pages carefully, looking for any mention of a pursuit or suspect in my area during the time of the incident. Nothing. No pursuit called in. No suspect description broadcast. No request for backup. According to official records, Sheriff Sheila had not been involved in any active chase or emergency response at the time she destroyed my gate. My investigation did not stop there. At the local diner the following day, I overheard 2 Public Works employees discussing Sheriff Sheila. When I joined their conversation, they grew hesitant until I explained my situation. "Not surprised," the older worker finally admitted, glancing around to ensure we were not overheard. "Remember the Peterson place? Their chicken coop got flattened last year. Sheriff claimed she was responding to a call, but nobody ever heard what call that was." His colleague nodded. "An old Mrs. Abernathy's mailbox. Sheila blamed it on a drunk driver, but Mrs. Abernathy swears she saw the sheriff's cruiser hit it after Mrs. Abernathy complained about noise from that fundraiser Sheila's brother was running." Armed with this information, I spent the next 3 days at the county records office, requesting every civilian complaint filed against the sheriff's department in the past 3 years. The clerk grew increasingly uncomfortable with my persistence, but could not legally withhold public records. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. 7 incidents of property damage attributed to Sheriff Sheila, all explained away as necessary police action, all involving citizens who had, in some way, challenged her authority or questioned her decisions, All complaints eventually closed with no disciplinary action noted. I organized my findings methodically, dispatch logs, witness statement, complaint history, and added them to my growing file. This was not an isolated incident or a moment of poor judgment. This was a pattern of behavior from someone who believed her badge made her untouchable. That realization transformed my anger into something colder and more focused. This was not just about my gait anymore. This was about accountability, about justice, about ensuring that Sheriff Sheila learned that a badge was not a license to bully citizens but a responsibility to protect them. I knew then that this would require more than a complaint form buried in a deputy's drawer. This would require legal action, and I was prepared to pursue it all the way to court if necessary. Finding an attorney willing to challenge the sheriff's department proved more difficult than I anticipated. The first two lawyers I contacted in Millfield declined to take my case, citing conflicts of interest that they refused to elaborate on. The third suggested I simply file an insurance claim and let sleeping dogs lie. His nervous glances toward the door during our consultation told me all I needed to know about Sheriff Sheila's influence in our small community. I expanded my search to the neighboring county and finally found Martin Oakes, a civil rights attorney with a reputation for holding public officials accountable. His office was modest but professional, walls lined with framed newspaper articles detailing successful cases against various government agencies. "Show me what you have," Martin said after I explained my situation, his expression neither dismissive nor overly encouraging. I placed my carefully organized folder on his desk. Photos of the destroyed gate from multiple angles, Larry's notarized witness statement, copies of the dispatch logs showing no pursuit recorded, the compiled history of similar incidents involving Sheriff Sheila. Martin reviewed each document methodically, occasionally making notes. When he reached the last page, he looked up at me with new interest in his eyes. "This is more comprehensive than most cases I see," he admitted, leaning back in his chair. "Most people come in with righteous anger but little evidence. You have built something substantial here." "I spent 40 years in construction," I replied. "I know that a structure is only as good as its foundation." Martin nodded appreciatively. "There is precedent for this type of case. Barlow v. Henderson County Sheriff's Department resulted in a $175,000 judgment when an officer damaged property without proper cause. The Mitchell case in Oregon established that hot pursuit claims require verification through dispatch records." He pulled out a legal pad and began writing. "We will draft a notice of intent to sue. This gives the department 30 days to respond before we file formal litigation. Often, this alone is enough to prompt a settlement offer." "I am not interested in settling quietly," I stated firmly. "This is about accountability." Martin looked up from his notes. "Justice and compensation are not mutually exclusive, Mr. Hamilton. You deserve both." 3 days later, Sheriff Sheila received formal notice of my intent to sue her department for $200,000 in damages, covering property destruction, emotional distress, and punitive damages for willful misconduct. The legal document outlined each piece of evidence contradicting her claim of necessary police action and requested preservation of all cruiser dash cam footage and GPS logs. I expected retaliation. I did not expect it to arrive so quickly or in such a petty form. 5 days after serving notice, I returned home from grocery shopping to find a bright orange citation affixed to my mailbox. The violation notice cited County Code 18.7, improper fencing regulations, creating visual obstruction. The citation demanded correction within 10 days, or a fine of $100 per day would be assessed. The irony was bitter. The same fence she had destroyed was now allegedly in violation of county regulations, regulations that had never been enforced in the 15 years since I built it. The citation was signed personally by Sheriff Sheila rather than a code enforcement officer. I called Martin immediately. "She is trying to intimidate me." "She is doing more than that," Martin replied after I described the citation. "She is creating a paper trail to justify her original actions. If your fence was illegally constructed, she can claim she had reason to access your property." "It was never in violation before she destroyed it," I argued. "Exactly," Martin said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "This citation is dated after our notice of intent to sue. It demonstrates clear retaliation, which strengthens our case considerably. She just handed us additional evidence of misuse of power." I photographed the citation and added it to our growing file. Sheriff Sheila clearly believed her badge made her invulnerable, but her arrogance was becoming her greatest weakness. Each retaliatory move only reinforced our case that she operated not from legal authority but from personal vendetta. "Do not remove the remains of your gate," Martin advised, "and do not respond to the citation directly. Let me handle it through legal channels." That evening, sitting on my porch looking at the broken entrance to my property, I felt something shift inside me. The fear and anger were still present, but they had been joined by something else: certainty. Sheriff Sheila had broken more than my gate. She had broken trust, abused power, violated the very principles she had sworn to uphold. And now she would face the consequences of her actions in a forum where her badge carried no special weight: a court of law. Martin wasted no time filing a Freedom of Information Act request for Sheriff Sheila's cruiser GPS logs and dash cam footage from the day of the incident. The county administrator initially claimed the footage had been automatically deleted after 7 days per department policy. Martin countered by presenting evidence that the department's own published retention policy required preservation of all videos involving property damage for a minimum of 60 days. 3 tense weeks passed before a thumb drive arrived at Martin's office via certified mail. The reluctance to share this evidence only heightened our suspicion about what it might contain. Martin called me immediately. "Can you come to my office this afternoon? We have the footage." I arrived to find Martin's computer monitor turned toward the client chair. He closed his office door, dimmed the lights slightly, and pressed play without comment. The dash cam video began at 2:17 p.m. according to the timestamp, approximately 10 minutes before the incident. Sheriff Sheila's cruiser was traveling slowly down County Road 16, passing familiar landmarks. There was no siren, no lights, no radio chatter about pursuit or suspects. The cruiser's speed never exceeded 25 miles per hour, hardly the pace of an active chase. At 2:23 p.m., the cruiser stopped at the intersection near my property. For nearly 4 minutes, the vehicle remained stationary, engine idling. Through the windshield, my gate was clearly visible approximately 50 yards ahead. The road remained empty in both directions. Then, at 2:27 p.m., the cruiser backed up slightly before accelerating forward. The camera captured my gate growing larger in the frame until impact. The sound of splintering wood came through clearly on the audio. The cruiser came to a stop inside my property, and Sheriff Sheila could be heard speaking into her radio. 10:23 at the Hamilton property. Conducting search related to case 47B. Martin paused the video. "There is no case 47B in the department's active case log. We checked." He switched screens to display the GPS data log. The information was damning in its precision. The cruiser had traveled at normal road speed until reaching my street. It had then slowed considerably, stopped completely near my entrance, then accelerated to 27 miles per hour in the short distance before impact. "This is not pursuit behavior," Martin stated flatly. "This shows deliberate, premeditated property destruction. The acceleration pattern alone contradicts any claim of emergency response." The data continued to tell its story through cold, impartial numbers. The cruiser had idled for 3 minutes and 42 seconds before accelerating. After destroying my gate, it had remained on my property for 9 minutes and 17 seconds before departing. No other police vehicles arrived. No suspect was transported from the scene. Martin compiled all this evidence into a comprehensive legal filing. The formal lawsuit requested $75,000 for property damage, loss of security, and necessary reinstallation costs. It demanded an additional $125,000 in punitive damages for willful misconduct, abuse of power, and subsequent retaliation through selective code enforcement. "The numbers are high," I acknowledged as Martin prepared to submit the documents. "They are justified," he replied firmly. "Punitive damages exist specifically to discourage this type of behavior. If the consequence for destroying a citizen's property is merely replacing it, what incentive exists for change?" The lawsuit was filed on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, local media had picked up the story. The Millfield Gazette ran a front-page headline: "Local homeowner sues Sheriff's Department for alleged wrongful property destruction." They included a still image from the dash cam showing the cruiser accelerating toward my gate. The sheriff's office initially responded with a statement calling the lawsuit frivolous and an attempt to extract money from taxpayers. That position became difficult to maintain when the newspaper published a follow-up story, including statements from 3 other citizens describing similar incidents of property damage at Sheriff Sheila's hands. Public opinion began to shift palpably. Comments on the newspaper's online article criticized the department's dismissive response. People began approaching me in the grocery store and at church, sharing their own experiences with Sheriff Sheila's heavy-handed tactics. She ticketed me for my grass being half an inch too tall the day after I spoke at the town council meeting opposing her budget increase, confided Mrs. Henderson, my pharmacist. My son's car was impounded for suspicious activity after he refused to delete a video of deputies being rude to high school students, shared Coach Thomas. These stories reinforced what the evidence already showed. Sheriff Sheila used her position not to protect and serve, but to control and intimidate. The Sheriff's Department filed a motion to dismiss, claiming qualified immunity protected Sheriff Sheila from liability for actions taken in her official capacity. Martin countered with the GPS data and dash cam footage, arguing that deliberate, unprovoked property destruction fell well outside the boundaries of qualified immunity protection. The judge denied the motion to dismiss in a 10-page ruling that described the evidence as troubling and the department's defense as lacking substantive merit. A trial date was set for 3 months later. Sheriff Sheila's public appearances dwindled noticeably in the weeks that followed. Her usual spots at ribbon cuttings and community events were filled by deputies. The monthly Coffee with the Sheriff program was indefinitely postponed. The department's social media accounts, once updated daily with warnings about suspicious persons and minor violations, fell silent. She was retreating, but I knew better than to mistake tactical withdrawal for surrender. The most dangerous phase would come next, when she realized her badge could not shield her from accountability, when she understood that the paper trail she had created would lead not to my submission, but to her reckoning. When the local news aired the security footage, it was like watching the town wake from a long sleep. The grainy video showed everything: my quiet afternoon, Sheila's cruiser turning deliberately into my driveway, the slow acceleration, and then the violent collision with my handcrafted gate. There was no emergency, no suspect, no justification, just the raw exercise of power against property. This footage appears to show Sheriff Daniels deliberately driving through a residential gate, the reporter said, her voice carrying a hint of disbelief. The homeowner has filed a lawsuit seeking $200,000 in damages. The station cut to my interview. I had dressed in my best flannel shirt, wanting to look respectable but not pretentious. "It is not about the money," I explained, my weathered hands folded in my lap. "It is about accountability. If she can destroy my property without consequence, whose home is safe?" My phone began ringing that evening. First came Alina Jenkins, who taught third grade for 30 years before retiring. Sheriff Sheila ticketed me 3 times in 1 month after I questioned her fundraising tactics at the school board meeting, she told me, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and relief that someone was finally speaking up. Then Thomas from the grocery store called. She threatened to search my delivery trucks whenever she wanted if I did not donate to the department charity ball, he confided. "I have been paying protection money disguised as donations for years." Even Pastor Williams reached out, speaking in hushed tones despite being alone in his church office. She interrupted our homeless outreach, claiming we needed permits we had already filed. When I showed her the paperwork, she said God might protect my soul, but only she protected my church building. These were not isolated incidents. They were threads in a tapestry of small abuses, too minor individually to fight, but devastating as a pattern. My case had opened the floodgates. By the end of the week, a petition was circulating through town calling for Sheila's temporary suspension pending investigation. People signed it in the diners, at gas stations, and after church services. Some signed with shaking hands, looking over their shoulders. Others signed with fierce determination, adding personal notes about their own experiences. The mayor, always politically cautious, issued a statement so carefully worded it almost said nothing at all. "The administration takes all allegations of procedural irregularities within our law enforcement division seriously. A comprehensive review of departmental policies is underway to ensure all officers serve with the highest standards of accountability." Politicians' words, empty calories, but what mattered was what happened next. Sheila stopped making public appearances. Her cruiser, once a constant presence at local events and ribbon cuttings, vanished from view. The department sent deputies to community meetings instead. Press releases came from the undersheriff. "Have you seen Sheila lately?" Neighbors would ask each other at the farmer's market or hardware store. No one had. She had retreated like a wounded animal, dangerous but hiding. I drove past the department one evening, curious. Her personal truck was in the parking lot, but she was nowhere to be seen. Through the windows, I could see officers gathered in the conference room, faces grim, gesturing at documents spread across the table. That night I stood before my broken gate under a ceiling of stars. The splinters and twisted metal had become more than just damage. They were evidence of a turning point. The town's fear was transforming into something else, something stronger. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Department legal counsel requested a meeting tomorrow. They're worried. I smiled, not with joy but with grim satisfaction. Sheila's shadow still loomed over our town, but her silence said more than any denial could. The wall was cracking, and through those cracks, light was beginning to shine. The county courthouse stood 3 stories tall, red brick and white columns projecting an authority older than any current inhabitant of our town. I had passed it thousands of times but rarely entered. Now I climbed those wide stone steps with my lawyer beside me, my shoes polished and my tie uncomfortably tight. "Remember," she said, straightening her blazer, "this is not the trial. This is discovery. Sheila will be under oath, but this is about gathering information, not winning arguments. Let me handle the questions." The deposition room had no windows, just blank walls, a long table, recessed lighting that cast no shadows, and a video camera on a tripod in the corner. The court reporter sat ready, fingers poised above her stenotype machine. Sheila was already seated when we entered, her attorney a balding man with expensive cufflinks whispering in her ear. For the first time since she had destroyed my gate, Sheila and I were face to face across a table rather than across a broken fence. She wore her uniform, a power move my lawyer had warned me she might attempt, the brass badge catching the fluorescent light with every breath. But something was different about her. The swagger was diminished. Her eyes darted around the room rather than holding steady. "State your name and position for the record," my lawyer began after preliminaries. "Sheriff Sheila Daniels, County Sheriff's Department." Her voice was clipped, professional, no emotion. "Sheriff Daniels, please describe the events of May 15th that led to damage of my client's property." Her attorney leaned forward. "I would advise my client to give a general response regarding official duties." Sheila nodded slightly. "I was responding to a situation that required immediate police presence. In the course of my official duties, incidental contact was made with a gate structure on the plaintiff's property." "Incidental contact," my lawyer repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Sheriff Daniels, were you in pursuit of a suspect at this time?" "I had reason to believe a person of interest in an ongoing investigation might have been in the vicinity." "And this person of interest, do you have a name, description, or case number associated with this individual?" Sheila shifted in her seat. "The information pertains to an active investigation." "Yet no official pursuit was radioed in, according to dispatch records we have obtained. Is that correct?" Her attorney interrupted. "My client makes split-second decisions in the field based on officer safety and public welfare considerations." The deposition continued this way for an hour, Sheila offering vague justifications, her attorney running interference. Then my lawyer changed tactics. "Let's review the GPS data from your vehicle." She slid a document across the table. "According to this log, your cruiser stopped completely for 47 seconds at the intersection before turning into my client's driveway. The vehicle then idled for 12 seconds before accelerating toward the gate. Does this match your recollection of events?" Sheila's face tightened. "I cannot recall specific timing details during a response situation." "I understand. Perhaps the dash camera footage will refresh your memory." My lawyer nodded to the technician who had set up a monitor. "The court has approved the viewing of this evidence as part of today's deposition." The room darkened slightly as the screen illuminated. The footage was better than I had expected, clear enough to see my porch, my half-repaired hinge, and the peaceful street beyond. No figures running, no disturbances, just an ordinary afternoon. The cruiser stopped at the intersection, waited, then turned deliberately into my drive. "Sheriff Daniels," my lawyer said quietly as the footage played, "can you identify the suspect you were pursuing in this video?" Sheila's jaw worked back and forth. The angle does not show the full tactical situation. Yet the camera shows a full 140-degree field of view. No pedestrians, no vehicles fleeing the scene. Just my client's property, which your vehicle then accelerates toward. The footage continued, showing the moment of impact. The cruiser gaining speed, the gate splintering, and then Sheila emerging from the vehicle, looking not surprised or concerned, but irritated. You testified earlier that you feared for officer safety, my lawyer continued. What specific threat are you responding to in this footage? Her attorney objected, but the damage was done. Everyone in the room could see what the footage showed. No emergency, no split-second decision, just deliberate destruction. When the lights came back on, Sheila's face had changed. The professional mask had slipped, revealing something colder underneath. The judge presiding over the deposition made notes, his expression giving away nothing. Based on the inconsistencies between the testimony and the evidence presented, he said finally, I am setting this matter for full trial proceedings. The court finds sufficient cause to proceed with the plaintiff's claims. I walked out of that cold room feeling taller than when I entered. My lawyer touched my elbow as we descended the courthouse steps. They'll try to settle now, she said. They saw what we saw, their defense is unraveling. The afternoon sun felt warm on my face as I looked back at the courthouse. I was no longer just the man with the broken gate. I was the man who had cracked Sheriff Sheila's shield, and we both knew it. 1 week before the trial date, I was inspecting the tomato plants in my garden when the mail truck rumbled up my drive. The new gravel crunched under its tires, part of the repairs I had made while waiting for justice. The mailman handed me a certified letter with the county seal in the corner. Inside was a settlement offer from the sheriff's department. $80,000. The document was thick with legal language, but the terms were clear enough. In exchange for dropping all claims, they would pay damages and my legal fees. The final paragraph caught my attention. Neither party shall make public statements regarding the settlement or underlying incident. A check for silence. I called my lawyer immediately. We met at her office downtown, the letter spread between us on her desk. She tapped a pen against her legal pad, her expression thoughtful. From a purely financial perspective, this is not a bad offer, she explained. Court cases are unpredictable. You might get more at trial, but you could also get less. And if we refuse? Then we go to trial next week. Full testimony, public record, media coverage. I stared at the number on the page. $80,000 would more than cover my damaged property. It would pay for a new workshop, new tools, maybe even a small vacation. But something felt wrong about it. They want me to be quiet, I said finally. They are not just paying for the gate, they are paying for my silence. My lawyer nodded. That is standard language in settlements like this. They need to contain the public relations damage. I thought about Alina, the retired teacher, about Thomas from the grocery store, about Pastor Williams, about all the people who had called me, texted me, stopped me on the street to share their own stories of intimidation and abuse. What happens to Sheila if I take this deal? I asked. Likely nothing official. The department absorbs the cost. She might face internal discipline, but it all stays quiet, and she stays in power. My lawyer leaned back in her chair. This is your decision. I can advise you on the legal aspects, but only you can decide what justice looks like in this case. That night I sat on my porch looking at the new gate frame going up. Not finished yet, but stronger than the original. Steel reinforced, properly anchored. The symbolism was not lost on me. I drafted my response with a steady hand. After careful consideration, I must decline the settlement offer of $80,000. This case is not about financial compensation, but about public accountability. I look forward to presenting the full facts at trial. The next morning, I delivered my response to my lawyer, who filed it by afternoon. By evening, word had spread through town about my decision. My phone rang constantly, some calling to question my sanity for refusing that much money, others to express quiet support. The following day, I drove past the sheriff's department on my way to the hardware store. Through the large windows, I could see officers moving back and forth, an unusual flurry of activity. In the parking lot, Sheila was placing boxes in the trunk of her personal vehicle, files, personal items from her office, a framed certificate. She looked up as I drove past, our eyes meeting briefly through my windshield. There was no anger there anymore, just the hollow recognition of someone who knows their time is running out. That evening, my neighbor Larry stopped by to help with the gate installation. "Heard you turned down some serious cash," he said, holding a post steady while I secured it. "It was not enough," I replied. "Not enough money." I shook my head. "Not enough justice." Larry nodded, understanding without requiring further explanation. We worked in comfortable silence as the sun set, the new gate taking shape, stronger and more secure than what had been destroyed. This was no longer just about a wooden barrier or property rights. It had become something larger. The money they offered was meant to end the story quietly. But some stories need to be told loudly, in open court, on public record, where the truth cannot be buried under legal settlements or confidentiality clauses. In turning down their offer, I had made my choice. And based on Sheila's actions, clearing out her office, preparing for what was coming, she knew what that choice meant. The wall of silence protecting her was cracking, and I was the one swinging the hammer. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. No grand chamber with soaring ceilings like in the movies, just a functional room with fluorescent lighting, wooden benches, and the persistent hum of an overworked air conditioning system. Despite its modest appearance, the weight of the moment pressed down on everyone present. I sat beside my lawyer at the plaintiff's table, my suit freshly pressed, my testimony rehearsed but honest. Across the aisle, Sheila sat with her attorney and a representative from the county legal department, a new addition suggesting the department was concerned enough to send reinforcements. The judge entered, an older woman with silver hair and reading glasses that she peered over rather than through. "All rise," came the bailiff's command, and we stood as one organism, united only by this moment of formality. The trial itself lasted 3 days. My testimony came first, the story of my gate, my quiet life, and the day it was shattered without warning or apology. I described building that gate with my own hands, each board selected for strength and character. I explained what it meant to me, not just security, but independence, a symbol of the life I had built for myself. "And you witnessed Sheriff Daniels destroy this gate?" my lawyer asked. "I did." She accelerated directly into it with no warning, no sirens, no emergency. Sheila's testimony came next, her uniform pressed, her demeanor professional but tense. She repeated the story she had maintained since the beginning, an emergency response, a split-second decision, unfortunate collateral damage in the line of duty. "Did you attempt to contact the homeowner before entering the property?" my lawyer asked during cross-examination. "There was no time," Sheila responded. "Yet the GPS logs show your vehicle idling for 12 seconds in the driveway before accelerating. Is 12 seconds not enough time to use your radio, your siren, or to knock on a door?" Sheila's response was clipped. I made a tactical assessment based on my training and experience. Then came the technical evidence. The GPS logs showing no pursuit, the dash cam footage showing no suspect, the dispatch records showing no emergency call. The department representative shifted uncomfortably as each piece was presented. My neighbor Larry testified about what he witnessed. The retired dispatcher confirmed no pursuit was logged that day. Even a former deputy, now working in another county, testified about the department's pattern of unwritten policies regarding civilian interactions. On the final day, both attorneys made their closing arguments. Sheila's lawyer spoke of the difficult decisions law enforcement must make, the split-second judgments, the thankless job of keeping communities safe. He asked for understanding, for deference to authority. My attorney stood slowly, adjusted her glasses, and addressed the jury with quiet confidence. "This case is not about law enforcement versus civilians," she began. "It is about power and its proper use. When we give someone a badge, a gun, and authority over others, we do so with trust that this power will be used to protect, not to intimidate, to serve, not to dominate." She played the dash cam footage one final time, the silent destruction unfolding again on the courtroom monitor. "What you see here is not protection. It is not service. It is the casual exercise of power without accountability. And in a democracy, no one, no matter their position, should be beyond the reach of justice." The jury deliberated for just under 2 hours. When they returned, the courtroom fell silent. The foreman, a retired electrician, stood with the verdict form in hand. On the claim of intentional property damage, we find in favor of the plaintiff. My heart pounded so loudly, I almost missed the next words. On the claim of violation of civil rights under color of authority, we find in favor of the plaintiff. The damages were announced: $75,000 for the property damage, loss of use, and emotional distress. Then an additional $125,000 in punitive damages, assessed against the department for failing to properly supervise and discipline. $200,000 total, the exact amount we had requested. The courtroom erupted in hushed conversations. The judge called for order, then officially entered the verdict. As we stood to leave, I caught Sheila's eye one last time. There was no anger there, no defiance. Only the hollow recognition of someone who had finally been held accountable for their actions. Outside, reporters waited with cameras and microphones. "How do you feel about the verdict?" someone called out. I thought carefully before responding. This was never about money. It was about establishing that no one is above the law, especially those sworn to uphold it. The next morning's headline read exactly as my lawyer predicted: "Sheriff's Department pays for wrecking what they should protect." The subheadline was even more pointed: "Jury finds intentional misconduct in property destruction case." A week later, without fanfare or public statement, Sheriff Sheila submitted her resignation. No ceremony marked her departure. No press release acknowledged her years of service. Just a nameplate removed from an office door and a badge turned in quietly on a Tuesday morning. She had come onto my property without warning or cause. And now, her entire department had paid the price for that single, arrogant step. Spring arrived with a vengeance that year: early blooms, warm breezes, and the persistent sound of hammering coming from my driveway. The new gate was rising, not just repaired but reimagined, taller than before, reinforced at critical points, built not just to last but to stand as a testament. I had hired 2 local carpenters to help with the heavy work, but saved the finishing touches for myself. The cedar planks were oiled rather than painted, showing off the natural grain and character of the wood. The hinges were forged steel, custom-made by a blacksmith in the next county over, built to outlast whoever installed them. "Quite a project," my neighbor Larry commented, leaning against his truck one afternoon as I worked. "Worth every penny of that settlement." I stepped back, inspecting the nearly completed structure. The money helped, but this was never about the settlement. And it was true. The check had cleared, $200,000 minus my lawyer's percentage. I had deposited most of it, putting it away for retirement and home repairs. But a significant portion had been earmarked for something else entirely. The day we hung the gates for the final time, I attached a small bronze plaque near the right hinge. Nothing ostentatious, just a simple marker with a message. "You cannot kick down what is built on truth." That same afternoon, I attended the first meeting of the newly formed Community Oversight Committee at the public library. 15 residents, teachers, plumbers, store owners, retirees, gathered around tables pushed together in the community room. I had used part of my settlement to help establish a fund for legal aid, focusing on cases involving police accountability and civil rights. "Most people do not know their rights when interacting with authorities," I explained to the group. "They do not know what questions to ask, what documentation to request, or when to speak up. We are going to change that." We developed simple pamphlets explaining citizens' rights during traffic stops, property searches, and police questioning. We organized community workshops where people could ask questions without fear. We created a phone number people could call if they felt their rights were being violated. The new sheriff, promoted from deputy after Sheila's resignation, was initially wary of our group. I invited him to coffee at the local diner one morning, away from official settings and uniforms. "I am not anti-police," I told him as we sat across from each other, steam rising from our mugs. "I am pro-accountability. There is a difference." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But understand my position. My officers need to know they can do their jobs without looking over their shoulders constantly. And citizens need to know they can live their lives without fear of those meant to protect them," I countered. "Perhaps we can find common ground there." Over the following months, something unexpected happened. Our town changed, not dramatically or suddenly, but in small, meaningful ways. The new sheriff implemented body cameras for all deputies. The mayor established a civilian review process for complaints. Even the local paper began publishing regular updates on police activities and department policies. Not everyone approved, of course. Change never comes without resistance. I received anonymous letters suggesting I leave town. My newly rebuilt gate was vandalized once, spray paint quickly removed, no lasting damage done. But these were dying gasps of the old way, not serious threats to the new. 1 year after the verdict, I hosted a barbecue in my backyard. Larry was there, along with many neighbors who had supported me through the ordeal. Eleanor, the retired teacher, Thomas from the grocery store, Pastor Williams. Even my lawyer brought her family. As we gathered around tables laden with food, Pastor Williams raised his glass in a toast. "To better fences and better neighbors." Everyone laughed, but the meaning was clear. My broken gate had become something larger than a personal grievance. It had become a turning point, a moment when a small town decided that power should have limits, regardless of who wielded it. Late that evening, after the guests had gone and I sat alone on my porch, I watched fireflies rising from the grass. My property was peaceful again. My gate stood strong. But the true victory was not physical. It was the knowledge that sometimes one person standing firm can change more than just their own circumstance. Sheila was gone, her shadow faded from our town, but my porch remained. My gate stood guard. My peace had returned, deeper now, rooted in justice rather than just solitude. And this time I knew without doubt that it would never fall without a fight. Because this time I was not standing alone.